So just last month, I joined Penn State University as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the university. This is a state university with about 80,000 students. It has 23 campuses across the state of Pennsylvania. And my mandate is to bring sustainability, incorporate sustainability into research, into teaching, into student life, and in community engagement across the 23 campuses.
Could you give me an example of what you do in terms of sustainability?
Okay, so right now I'm just there for 30 days. We're just getting to know the landscape. Okay. It's like a big country, so meeting people and meeting the stakeholders. And the idea is to co-create sustainability programs in a number of areas that are of interest to the communities. So some communities in Pennsylvania are very rural. In fact, where Penn State is located, the main campus is in State College. It's the center county, which is very rural, agricultural. And so Penn State has a very large department in agriculture, and it has a long tradition of doing extension services with farmers. So we are trying to develop a program on food, water, and energy security for Pennsylvania. It will involve convening groups of community members to talk with researchers in food, water, and energy and try to come up with a vision of what Pennsylvania 2050 will look like. Based on that, we will develop some synthesis and provide it to the local legislators, the regional policymakers, and share it with the community so that we all are on the same page as to how we move towards.
So it's a bit like a university working together with the local community as a good citizen with its expertise, right?
Right. So using that expertise to turn it into ourselves, both as a university, because we have a $6 billion budget that we need to also make sustainable. It is now currently, like any other university, it involves not that many considerations about ecological efficiency and so on. So we are doing both, turning it on ourselves and then turning the expertise into our neighbors and into our communities.
And I'm guessing that your past experience is valuable in doing all that.
I would assume so. That's why I think they brought me in. Before coming to Penn State, I was with Future Earth, which is this research platform for the Anthropocene. And there, the responsibilities were somewhat different, but also same. So different in the sense that Future Earth is a global platform, so the canvas is much larger than Pennsylvania. But it's the same in the sense that Future Earth wants to encourage transdisciplinary, solutions-oriented science. And that is what Penn State is also very keen on doing, being what's called a land and agricultural university. This is very important to actually make changes on the ground.
Future Earth is about unifying science, art, traditional knowledge, and humanities.
Right.
So sounds like a very big task.
Yes, unifying science with the other discourses to me is central. And I think Future Earth has this as a part of its vision, although I must say that in the initial years, Future Earth has largely been a science organization. 90% of the 50,000 scientists that work within Future Earth Network are from the natural sciences.
It's been around for how many years?
So it was constituted in 2014, and then in 2015 the Secretariat was built, and I was the first executive director brought in to formulate the Secretariat and the research programs. And so we have built now the Global Secretariat with global hubs in Tokyo, Paris, Stockholm, Boulder, Montreal, and we've got regional centers in 7 locations, including in Kyoto. So it's the Secretariat is built out, and then the research programs themselves are being re-architected to become what we call knowledge action programs. That means we are trying to combine researchers with policymakers, with community stakeholders to co-create, co-design, co-produce knowledge, so it will be useful in solving problems.
You were saying that initially it was more focused on science, but it's shifting focuses.
So it was the original legacy that we received was from natural science, but our mandate has always been to incorporate the social sciences, and in fact the International Social Science Council is on the governing board, and also the arts, humanities, and law, because we feel that in this period when we need a holistic understanding of the Earth and planetary systems, we cannot do that by segmented knowledge or siloed knowledge in the sciences. So we want to add these other discourses from religion, from the arts and aesthetics, from law, so that we can have a better grip on how to move towards sustainability.
So it sounds like it's in line with the theme of this conference that is being held in Liège this week.
In fact, I am really delighted to be here at the World Humanities Conference in Liège. This is, I think, a very seminal moment when science and arts and humanities can talk to each other. And I was delighted yesterday to see so many people interested in hearing about the unification of sciences and the arts. I think this is the challenge of the Anthropocene. For the last 300 years, from the emergence of science, we bifurcated subjective knowledge from objective knowledge. And this has paid tremendous dividends and has been very productive in terms of modernizing the world, creating technologies and science. But it also has been very destructive in the sense that it has completely evaporated any discussion of subjectivity, emotional connection to nature, to the sacred, and to a moral principle which needs to limit the kind of technological developments that we are now witnessing. So I think it is time for the 21st century that we bring these two parts of human thinking back together and then develop a higher synthesis which is more morally principled and sustainable in the long geological terms. Because otherwise what we are doing is we are destroying the geological cycles that have been stable for millions of years.
It's interesting because the whole humanity seems to be shifting its focus, looking at UN SDGs. They're talking about things like arts and culture, things like that.
Yes. So the SDGs are a good focal point. I think there's a global consensus among politicians, business leaders, academics, science, arts. And what we have been doing in one of our programs is tracking how artists and aesthetic inquiry can make restorations of ecosystems and social communities. So artists are actually as engaged and as excited about participating in sustainable development as scientists are. So we need to bring that energy to talk to the scientific conversation. It is not easy to do because they talk different languages, they have different frameworks, they have different values. But a dialogue and a cross-fertilization, I think, will open up the common grounds on which they can work together. And we have some good examples of science and art communicating to create an understanding. And I will tell you the example of one that we were working on in France. Most people don't realize what it takes to produce a piece of steak and a few potatoes, so for lunch, which is a typical lunch in France. So you can tell them all the numbers about environmental pollution and use of water and so on, and they still don't really fully emotionally grasp it. So in order for them to emotionally understand the ecological consequences of food, of eating non-vegetarian foods, we did a small play in the farmer's market where we got actors to talk about what a typical lunch is and what it costs in terms of the environment and cruelty to animals and so on and so forth. And hundreds of people witnessed it, and it made them think more deeply about what they eat, how they eat, and the whole influence of food and the meaning of food. So they got into deep conversations that took them back to their families, and it was not because of the statistics or the numbers that we gave them, it was because of the way the actors in the play evoked emotions about food. So I am a big believer in the power of emotions to deepen our understanding about nature, and I think the environmental crisis in many ways is a reflection of the disconnect between humans and nature, an emotional disconnection. And art is the vehicle for making the connection. So I think it has a very important role to play, and scientists need to learn to become artists, or at least develop an aesthetic side. And I find it very interesting that when I talk to older scientists, 90% of those who are near retirement, I ask them, what are you going to do after your 30 years, 40 years of successful career in science? And guess what they say? All of them have picked some kind of art. And I ask them, how come you've been a scientist and now you're going to be doing art? And they say that we suppressed this part of it because it does not fit with career, it does not fit with the reward system, we didn't have time for it, we were busy with family and profession, but now we feel that this is what we want to contribute. So I find that very interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And collectively, I think we need to find a narrative to tell a story, or many narratives.
Right, and the collective story needs to be at a planetary level. It is, of course, a local story, but it's also a planetary story. And I think what is missing from the current narratives is the connectivity between the stories. So we need to build a master story for the Earth, which connects all those communities that are on the planet, and then connects our time, which is sort of more human time, with the geological time, which is the long-term deep evolution that the Earth and its people are going to have to go through.
Fascinating. Your work seems to be multifaceted. And can I ask a little bit about your own story? Because you are from Bhopal, and you saw the big industrial disaster, the Union Carbide accident. How were you engaged in the aftermath of the accident?
Yes. So the accident happened on December 3rd night in 1984. At that time, I was a professor at New York University teaching technology strategies. And I had lived in Bhopal for 23 years. I had gone to the engineering school there. And it was a complete eye-opener for me. It really changed my life in the sense that till then I had thought about technology as a force for good, that all progress came from technology, and this disaster showed in one night that technology can also kill 5,000, 6,000 people and then 12,000 over a period of time. It was the worst industrial accident in history. I went to study it, supported by my university, although it was a very controversial issue because Union Carbide was a big supporter of New York University at that time. And some of my senior colleagues were not interested in me going back there and opening that whole can of worms. But I went back, I studied the disaster. I wrote a book called Bhopal Anatomy of a Crisis. And I developed a theory of crisis management that talked about multiple perspective understanding of disasters and developing solutions in a stakeholder engaged mode. So that was true for me. Today people talk about transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, and I was talking about multiple perspectives of victims, of government, of corporations. So it was kind of a precursor to this transdisciplinarity idea. And without knowing it, I was turning into a transdisciplinarian back in 1984. And for the next 10 years, 15 years almost, I studied crises and established the field of crisis management in the business studies area. We launched a journal. We created an Institute of Industrial Crisis. The journal still exists, and it's called Organizations and Environment. It's published by SAGE. So a whole field has now emerged under trying to understand not only technological crises, but environmental crises broadly. And then in the 1990s, I turned my own research attention to not the big sort of accident crises, but the slow, continuing environmental crises that we are embedded in. And that led me to sustainability, and for the last 20 years I've been researching sustainability. My focus in the last 7 or 8 years is on what I considered then the most ignored part of sustainability.
Most ignored part.
Yes, and that was art and sustainability. So there was a business school in France, ICN Business School, that agreed to establish an international research chair on art and sustainable enterprise. So I worked with artists and what we call aesthetic inquiry academics to develop a way of looking at aesthetics as a form of rationality, and how it gets embedded in our daily lives and in our organizational lives, and then using art-based methods to make interventions into communities to make ecological and social restoration. So that chair is still continuing, and one of the reasons I'm here at the World Humanities Conference is to talk to the network of UNESCO chairs in sustainability and related topics, so that we can expand this idea of art and sustainability.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, Kenji. I look forward to seeing more of the work that you're doing. It's very exciting. And I just visited the website last night, and I was very impressed with the work that you all have done. So thank you for having me.
Indeed.